So you found your next hire. They're brilliant, they have strong work ethic, and their rate fits within your budget. The only difference is that they work remotely. Hi, my name is Isaias. I'm a top rated freelancer on Upwork. I've earned over $100,000 on the platform, helping businesses just like yours take control of their technology. Now, I have an IT agency called Buna Tech Solutions where we do just that. We handle the technology of busy business owners and entrepreneurs so they can focus on growth. Now, for the past 10 years that I've worked in technology, 7 of which were fully online. I've supported clients and businesses in UK, the US, Canada, Australia, all from the Caribbean. My firm is a fully remote first organization. We support businesses throughout the Caribbean and the United States. So I know a thing or two when it comes to working remotely. I have seen remote work environments that were tightly controlled. Businesses knew exactly the level of access staff had, what they had or did not have access to, where the information was stored, what they could or could not do. I've also seen environments where employees could access information from any device, not just their designated work device. Now, depending on the type of business that you have, there is no one size fit all on how to set up a remote environment. It could well be that a less controlled environment might fit perfectly for your use case and the type of business that you have. Whereas in other environments, you need something that is more tightly controlled. In this video, we're going to look at the 4 main ways to support remote employees and how to choose the right setup based on their work, based on your budget, and based on the level of security that you need. So the 4 options that we're going to cover are firstly, giving an employee a company device. Second, setting up a virtual computer for an employee. Third, giving them some business application or business tool. And lastly, they use in their own personal device. Stick around to the end because I'm going to show you a fifth method that combines bits and pieces of each of these. So, what are the 4 main remote work options? Well, the first one is a company device or a company laptop. Now, we'll go into each one of those in detail, but basically, a company laptop is a device that you purchase on a website, Amazon, Walmart, etc., and you ship it to that employee. It generally gives you a lot more control of said device because it belongs to the company. It's yours, it's a business device. The second option that we have is a virtual computer. So the virtual computer can be on a major provider, cloud provider like AWS or Azure or Google Cloud Platform. And basically, the staff would access this particular virtual computer. That's the second option. The third option is some business tools. And typically, these business tools revolve around collaboration and communication. So you'll get, if you're in the Google space, you look for something like Google Workspace, and you'll have Google Drive and the different Google tools that you'll need to collaborate and communicate and manage your company information. Or if you're in Microsoft, you would have Microsoft 365, where you would have things like SharePoint and OneDrive and the other Microsoft tools. So that's business tools. And then you have your personal device where the employee would have their own device and they'll be able to access certain information from their personal device. So the key thing here is there's no one size fit all setup. Whatever option that you choose, match it with the work that you're doing, the company data, what level of control that's needed, and your budget. Now let's go into each of those in more detail. The first one we have is company laptop. So, what's the budget like, right? If you're going to get a company device, typically you need a device that is, if it's going to be a managed device, if you're using Windows, it needs to be Windows Pro. If you're going to be utilizing certain resources, for instance, Google tends to be Google Chrome tends to be a RAM intensive application. You want to give the device a sufficient RAM, sufficient hard drive space, sufficient CPU and GPU. So you're looking at anywhere from 900 to about 1,006 in cost, and that's a cost that you'd have to pay upfront for that particular device. So that's the budgetary consideration when it comes to getting a company device or a company laptop. So what's our best fit scenario here? Well, in a case where you have sensitive information, and it really depends on what industry that you're in. For instance, if you're in health, for instance, and you're a healthcare provider, depending on the health practice that you're doing, if you're in the US in particular, you need to follow HIPAA, and HIPAA compliance states that certain information, sensitive information, have to be secured and managed in a certain way. So, in a case like that, a company device would be the best option. For location, if you're in the EU or in the UK, you'll need to deal with GDPR. And with GDPR, your data information have to be handled in a particular way. So, depending on how sensitive the information is, a company device would be the best option, right? So that's the best fit scenario. Now, the second scenario is a full time employee. If you're getting a full time employee and they're going to be with you for the long haul, it might be good to get them a company device or a company laptop, right? In the case of a contractor or part time employee, then spending that type of upfront money might not be the best, especially if they have a short contract or if they're going to be working with you for just a small project. If they're going to be a full time employee, fully part of your team, they're in it for a long term, then a company device might be the best option in that case. The other best case scenario is install applications. So there are certain applications, if let's say you are an engineer and you need to use certain softwares, and these softwares take a lot of resources. Sometimes it's a lot more affordable to have these applications or softwares run from a machine than from a cloud environment. So if they need to access install applications, then a company device, some managed device would be the best option. And then if they need to do some work offline, if they need to do some work and they're on the move, if they need to go to different sites, if they need to visit some customers and they need a business device with them, then a company laptop would definitely be the best fit there. But in all options that we have, there are some trade-offs. So what are some of the trade-offs? For a company laptop, one of the first trade-off is the cost. So you need to consider purchase and you need to consider shipping, right? So to get the device to the employee will acquire a significant upfront cost, and that is something that you must consider. The other thing is repairs and replacement. Again, the device is the company's device, the business device, and the employee needs to use it so that they can perform the necessary work. If it gets damaged or if it's no longer able to work, then it needs to be repaired or it needs to be replaced. And sometimes there are cases where you get a bad batch or you get a device that is performing well for a week, 2 weeks, a month, then it gets damaged or then it's broken, not by the not by the employee or the staff, but just that the particular device at the time was a bad batch. So some devices might need to be repaired, some devices might need to be replaced, and that is more of a cost on the business. So that's one of the trade-offs. The other one is if the employee is leaving or the staff is leaving, then it needs to be returned. And that would consider shipping costs depending on where the employee is, back to your office or back to your location so that it can be cleaned and prepped for maybe potentially another employee. So these are just some of the trade-offs of getting a company device. So the key thing here is this: you would use a company laptop when sensitive information or sensitive work requires greater control over the device. And there are a lot of things that you can do on a company device to ensure that it is controlled exactly the way that you want it. The next one that we're going to look at is virtual computer. So again, what's the budget for a virtual computer? In the realm of AWS and Azure and Google Cloud Platform, the main cloud platform providers, looking at anywhere from $75 US dollars to 150 US dollars and above, right? So these vendors or cloud providers would rent basically their data center and their resources to you so that you could set up a virtual computer, and that comes with a cost. Now, there are a lot of considerations when you're dealing with virtual computers. So the different specs, the different um, size of the RAM, size of the hard drive, the speed of the machine could very much so determine the cost. But on average, based on years of experience doing this, that is on average the cost for a suitable virtual computer for staff between 75 and $150. Now, in what scenario is this the best fit? Again, if you're using sensitive work, or if they're doing sensitive work and they are working from their personal computer and then you're not able to ship a computer for them, then set up a virtual computer. Set up a virtual computer so they can do that sensitive work in that secure virtual environment. If they are international employees and shipping a device is just too costly. And be it full time employees, be it short term employees, be it part time employees, whatever the scope is, a virtual computer could well be the best fit for them. Again, if they're only going to be there on a contract for a week or 2 weeks, they can use that virtual computer, and then when it's done, you just deny their access. If they're a full-time employee and they're doing work day in and day out, again, a virtual computer can be used for them. Another best fit scenario is that it is easier to offboard a potential staff or employee in a virtual computer scenario. So, as we mentioned before, if you're dealing with a physical machine, a company device, then when the employee leaves, you would need to ship that device back to the office or back to the business location. In a case of a virtual computer, it's just a matter of denying that particular access, um, blocking certain access so that they are no longer able to access it. So it's an easier offboarding process when you're dealing with virtual computers. But again, there are a few trade-offs. So the first is that they would require reliable internet connections. In the case of a virtual computer, it is a lot more sensitive to fluctuations in network connectivity. So if they have, poor network, if they have a physical device or company device, and if they're doing some work, internet drop, they can still able to do their work. If they're working on something and internet drops, when it comes back on, they can send it or upload it. In the case of virtual computer, if there is no internet, then they cannot do their work. So that's one of the downsides of a virtual computer. You do need some good internet. The other one is that it is an ongoing monthly cost. So when you're dealing with cloud providers, it's not a one-off payment. If you buy a device from Amazon, it's a one-off payment. With a cloud provider, you need to pay for that resource every single month. So there is some ongoing monthly cost there. So that is worth considering. And it does require a higher level of management because depending on how you set up the environment, depending on how it is configured, you will be able to get certain benefits from said environment. So it does require a certain higher level of management. If something goes wrong, then it could potentially affect the entire fleet of devices. If you have a set of staff using the virtual computers, you don't want everybody down at the same time. So it does require a greater level of management. And again, the cost can increase rather significantly depending on the specs of the device. Again, if you want the highest spec virtual computer, then the cost will be more. And again, that will be a recurring monthly cost. So that's something to consider. The key takeaway: use a virtual computer to keep company files inside a controlled environment. So, if again you're dealing with sensitive work, sensitive information, and you are not able to upfront a physical computer, use a virtual computer. Keep the sensitive information secure. There's a lot of things you can do to deny access, like copying and pasting from that virtual computer to a user's machine. So you can implement that. So to keep sensitive information within a controlled environment, that's when you use a virtual computer. The next one is an online business tool. So typically the budget for an online business tool range from $6 to $22 and up. So it really depends on the use case. The big name providers like Google Workspace and Microsoft 365, their licenses range around that price. So they have different tiers typically. basic, standard, premium, and from basic you'll get around $6, $9, and then standard 12, 15, and premium, 20, 22, 25, and then it goes up. So typically you would need that for every single employee. And again, the benefits of that is you have a centralized online repository, a centralized online environment that you can manage and you can control certain access. Okay. So the best fit scenarios is for things like emails and documentation. Again, Google Workspace and Microsoft 365, the big providers here. There are browser-based work. So if someone needs to do some browser-based work, then you will definitely utilize one of these online business tools. If you're dealing with a low to moderate risk, if you're getting a graphic designer, for instance, and the graphic designer needs to edit some of your files, you can use any one of these platforms, Google Drive or Microsoft OneDrive, and you can put your video and share it with your editor, and your editor can then go to edit it, add their graphics, etc. So that's some low to moderate risk work that might be going on. And in a case like that, your online business tool will be the perfect fit, really. But again, there are trade-offs. So the first is that files may be downloaded. It depends on how you set up your business environment. So in the case of Google, in Google Workspace, in the case of Microsoft 365, you can indeed set up some limitations to edit and download and so forth. But generally speaking, that is just something to keep in mind. Your files, if it can be accessed, if it can be edited, most likely it can be downloaded. And if you're sensitive to information being stored on a personal device or a personal computer, that is something to consider. But the other trade-off is that it would require strict access rules. So, for instance, I have deployed environments with conditional access, and conditional access is a method of granting access based on specific conditions. For instance, you could say that only allow access to this folder or this file to person in this region or persons in this country. If they're out of this region, if they're out of this country, do not give them access. And that's important because sometimes as a business, you would want to ensure that other countries, if you're hiring in a particular region, that other countries or persons in other countries can access your files, especially if you're using these online business tools. So the key takeaway really is this. If you're using online business tools, use it when work is browser based and access can be tightly controlled. For personal laptop, the budget is zero for hardware because it is the staff or the employee's personal device. But you do have to consider the cost of the basic business tools. Again, things like emails, collaboration, and communication platforms. So that is the cost of having a staff or employee using their remote device. So, what are the best fit scenarios? Well, the first one is if there is little or no sensitive information. Again, you're dealing with information as I used previously, like a graphic designer, or you're dealing with an editor and they need to edit some text or edit some information for you. You don't need to send them a device. You don't need to set up a virtual computer for them. It is little or no sensitive information. They simply need to just do the work and then send you some results. So in that case, using their own personal laptop is all fine and well. If there is budgetary constraints and you need to get things moving quickly, then again utilizing a contractor, freelancer, staff, employees, personal device is all in order if cost is something to be considered. If they are temporary or contractor workers, you won't need to necessarily set up a virtual computer or set up or send them their own device. So if they are some temporary worker or some contractor worker and there is a clear arrangement of the scope of work that they need to do, then by all means they can use their personal computer. And again, if there is some public facing information or some simple task, basically, again, it's not sensitive and the task is simple and not, highly classified, for instance, then by all means, they can use their personal device. Now, again, there are trade offs. So the key trade off is you have no device control because it's the person's personal device. So if there's a company device, there's some device control. If it's a virtual computer, there's some device control. If they are using their personal device, then there is no device control. Typically, the hardware is harder to support. So there have been environments that I have supported where we are setting up certain tools and application, and because persons are using a personal device or a personal laptop, it is a lot difficult to support that particular environment. For instance, if you have a company device, then you can set up certain settings on a company device. So when you're deploying an application, everything is the same. On personal devices, you can do that. A lot of persons have different applications and different things going on, but sometimes it is necessary to get an application on their personal device. But it becomes a harder support issue, it becomes a support headache later down. So that's something to consider. Another thing to consider is data separation. So again, if they're using a personal device, they can potentially copy information. They can potentially, get certain information from business, from the whatever work that they're doing, and store it on their personal device. If they leave, that information could still remain on their device. So that is something to consider when you're dealing with remote staff using their personal devices. So the key takeaway is this: use personal laptops only when the work carries little risk to company information. If it does carry any risk at all, consider virtual computer. Consider uh, utilizing strict access business tools, or consider a company device. Now, when it comes to combining these options, there is a combine option setup or a hybrid setup. So the hybrid setup is this: the staff or the employee uses their personal device to do things like email. They use it for meetings, they use it for documentation, right? And then they go into a secure system for dealing with things like customer data. Again, depends on the industry, depends on your location. Dealing with things like financial records. They would access that particular secure systems to deal with this. If they have any sensitive application, and when I say sensitive, I mean an application that you would only need to use if you're either in a particular location or if you have a specific environment requirement, then they would access that secure system to utilize that sensitive application, right? So in a hybrid scenario, you use your personal device for things like in emails, meeting, and do basic documentation, and then you hop on a secure system for data and financial records, and sensitive application. So what is the budget? It ranges, but typically, once you're dealing with any secure system, you're dealing with a cloud provider typically. And again, the range goes from anywhere from $50 to $175 plus. It depends on your budget, and it depends on how secure, on how fast, on the level of resources you want for that particular environment. So the key takeaway is this: you combine options when employees need flexibility for simple work and stronger controls for sensitive tasks. So that's the time when you combine them for a hybrid setup. So how do you choose? How do you choose any one of these four options? Well, we mentioned it earlier on. You need to ask yourself some questions depending on certain categories. First of all, the work. What sort of work will they be doing? It is depending on the sensitivity, depends on the role, it depends on the scope, but based on the work that they're doing, it will determine the remote option. Depends on the data. How sensitive is that data and what will they access? What information would they need access to? Depends on the controls. What must you manage? So if they need an environment where they have more controls, then it will determine your remote option. If they have an environment that might need less controls, then that too will determine your remote option. So what must you manage? What must you have under control will determine which remote option you use. And lastly, your budget. What can you afford? If you can afford thousands of dollars, then it could well be that you can send devices, right? If your budget is a bit tighter, then you might have to consider a virtual computer. If it's tighter still, then you might have to consider some business applications with tight control. So the key takeaway is this: manager setup, the work, data sensitivity, the control needed, and your budget. So here's what I want you to do this week. Make a list of everyone working in your business. Next to each person, write down what device they use, what company information they use, and how you would remove access if they leave today. Then decide which of the four remote options best fit their role. If you cannot clearly place an employee into one of those setups, that's a sign that your remote working environment might need to be reviewed. If you're unsure of what setup is right for your remote team, book a free call at bonetech.com. We will help review your environment and give you the most practical way to help protect and optimize your business. If you would like to know the biggest tech gap that I see in small businesses, how to close that gap, and if it could be affecting yours, then watch this video next.